Good evening, everyone. So you're all very welcome to this week's 120 Dublin Stories with Santa Rita and the Little Museum of Dublin. Now, this evening, we're going to be speaking about Dermot Morgan, and I'm really so thrilled to see both of our guests joining in now. So this evening, I'm being joined by Dermot's son, Don Morgan, and then writer and director Gerry Stembridge, one of his Scrap Saturday colleagues. So I'm so thrilled to have you both here this evening. So thank you so sincerely for taking the time.
No problem.
No problem. Nice to see you, Don. Long time.
How are you, Gerard?
I'm fine. All in all, like your glasses, like
Thanks
the
very
setup.
much.
Yeah. Well,
They're not real. Not real.
was it? Okay.
But so I guess to everyone who's joining us this evening, if anyone has questions as we go through, please do type them in. But I guess just really to start us off, Don, to most of us, he was Ted, he was comedian Dermot Morgan, but to you, he was Dad. So I'd love you just to kind of, set the scene and kind of set us off and introduce us to the dad of your childhood.
Well, that's a very interesting question. He's well, it was certainly unusual, and I suppose my childhood is really kind of marked out by his presence, which consisted of woolly jumpers, war movies, and football. So in our house, there was always something going on. He was about 26 when I was born, so he was still very young when we were little. So there was a lot of kind of mayhem in the house. There was a lot of his friends would come and play football in the garden with us, and there'd be a lot of kind of sort of parties in the house. And so what looked to us very strange goings on as kids, because people turning up on Christmas morning and stuff like this. But a very someone who really kind of reveled, I think, in that kind of aspect of suburban life. Well, maybe only that aspect, but he was great with kids and whatever else, and certainly he was fantastic with us. But yeah, just like mile a minute sort of stuff, sort of punctuated with kind of periods of absolute silence, in particular when the news was on, or The Great Escape or Dan Buster's was on.
Okay, that paints quite a picture. I think any sentence that starts with woolly jumpers is off to a beautiful start. And then Gerry,
Can I just say, I'm immediately struck. I mean, Don and I have spoken a lot over the years. I'm really struck by the word silence. In no part of my experience with Dermot can I remember silences of any kind. Could you expand a little bit on that? Because I never knew him to take as much as a pause in, but then that was another world.
I think he was kind of charging up for seeing people like yourself.
Right.
But it was a very strange thing. I was saying to someone recently, one of my abiding memories of being sort of the same age as my own kids. So my eldest, also called Dermot by coincidence, is 5, nearly 6. And all I can remember was lying on the couch with him watching the movie, and he wouldn't utter a word. And they were just this kind of, but it was a weird calm, because like you're saying, like he could be bursting in the door the next minute and something, all hell would break loose. Just this kind of, but it was punctuated with kind of periods where there was very, very, I don't know if it was introspection, maybe it was, but he'd be kind of away in his own sort of thoughts, or he'd be kind of completely engrossed in a book or completely engrossed in telly. But yeah, it was sort of a funny thing. But like that, I know where you're coming from. Having seen a lot of him out and about, it was never quite a fair. But yeah, I think he was kind of getting ready for whatever kind of sort of crazy would happen then. But I think, yeah.
I would have loved to experience that, Dermot. I have to say that would have been quite something. I probably wouldn't have known. I'd have been uneasy. I'd have been wondering: is he annoyed with me for some reason? Is there something going on? But it's great to know that there was that part of him as well in the
Gerry, do you remember in the Madness of King George? I don't know if you saw it when it was out.
Long time ago.
And George III always uses the phrase "what" at the end of sentences.
Oh yeah.
He'd be kind of away with the fairies, and my middle son sometimes kind of goes off like that as well. But you catch his attention, you go, "Daddy," and then you go, "What?" And usually be back in our own world. So whatever he was kind of doing in that world, I don't know, garroting civil servants or something like that. Anyway, he'd be very much kind of engrossed in it.
Yeah, I because I didn't really know Dermot before Scraps Out. Oddly enough, we had encountered each other briefly at university when he was a guest at the LNH and things like that. I did a couple of shows, but I like the briefest encounter. So when I met him the first time, I remembered seeing him, but he didn't know me. But it was already like that was, you know, late 1989. And so 1989, you were already, you know, what, 12 or 11 or 12? Is that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I seem to recall, I don't know if you remember, I think you were working up in Belfast, were you, at the time?
There was, yeah, you right.
I seem to recall we went on a day trip up to Belfast, and he, with the intention of seeing you, and all I remember was we got to the border, and my dad was coaching us to say "Chuck a Garlosh" to British soldiers. and then, of course, when the two idiots in the back seat go to say it, he could put hands across them. All of a sudden, it was you know, shit got real.
There was nothing better your dad liked than a skite in a car. So there wasn't any excuse at all to take off up or down the country or across the country for any like whimsical reasons. So the notion of nipping up to Belfast to have a half-hour's conversation with me and then nip back down again meant nothing to them. But the thing I did want to say, and I'm sure I've said it to you before, and I bet you understand the feeling now that I didn't even know you had kids. Congratulations! But even though I only met him at that time, and I never visited the family home at that time. We were just in a kind of working relationship, but there was. He talked a lot about you, and you could tell he was so proud of being a dad, but not just being a dad. I think that for some reason or other, I sensed the fact that it was two sons he had at that time. He had two sons. There was subsequently a third, but Ben. But that he just loved having sons. I felt he really felt relaxed about being a father to sons. Is that how you remember it?
Yeah, well, he was very good at it, and it's kind of a thing as well. Like I don't live in Dublin, and I regret the fact that I don't have UCD within walking distance to watch some League of Ireland football on a Sunday afternoon and stuff like that. But he always seemed to be able to kind of he seemed to understand what kids like, particularly what boys kind of enjoy doing. But it's funny you mentioned the whole thing about being proud of having them. I do remember we went on holidays to Italy in about '94, so Ben was about a year and a half or so. Tormenting me with a broom that he kept throwing out over a gate, and I'd have to get it from. But he went into a bakery in Tuscany, and there was all these three kind of like almost like out of central casting, these little Italian widows or whatever else working behind the counter, and he went in to buy some focaccia, mainly because it sounds like a swear word, and they said, you know, this is your son, yeah, this is Ben's a year and a half, whatever, and these are also your sons, yeah, and they made some sort of comment about Babuzzi or something like that, saying that basically is a very virile man.
Oh, yeah, he'd love that. He'd absolutely love that.
Loaded out the place. Delighted.
Yeah.
That's good. And so, Gerry, tell us about how you met Dermot. Is my understanding correct that he saw nothing to it that you were working on with RTE and actually kind of said, "Oh, I like what you're up to. We should work together."
I'm glad to find that the propaganda I've been disseminating for a long time now has found its way back to you and as the raw truth. But that is pretty much it. I have to say it's a credit to him for watching these kind of odd programs. Nothing to it was what passed under young people's programming in RTE. And at that time when I worked in RTE, I always thought nothing to it was both a kind of young people's programs was often seen by the executives as a kind of banishment for people whose creativity refused to fit in with whatever were the needs for the important programming. So you were sent to young people's, where you could kind of do what you liked. and nobody paid you any mind. And they figured, well, you know, it's only the young people. And I don't quite know whether that's the same attitude as it was then. So this was a show that went out at 6:30 on I think a Monday evening, and so it was as a credit to Dermot that he picked up on it. It featured the then unknown Pauline McLean in her first kind of television go around, and then two other actor performers who have gone on to even greater things since, Michael Murphy and Veronica Coburn, who writes and directs now as well as act. And actually, Veronica and Michael later formed the basis with Ray Yates for a brilliant theatre company called Barabbas. And of course, I don't need to tell you what Pauline went on to do, but that was my understanding when Dermot got in touch. And the story I always tell, which Don can't deny because he was too young, is that Dermot contacted me on the basis that I would be part of a team of writers for this radio thing that was about to happen. And so I met him in a kind of a corner office he had in Ballsbridge, though, very classy. None of your old rubbish. He had this office upstairs, Q Productions, on the corner in Ballsbridge, and I remember going up there to have the chat. And I was sort of, I didn't know what to expect. I mean, at one level, I was thinking, well, you know, it's a radio program, and I didn't know who I was going to meet, what this team would be. But actually, I just met Dermot, and we chatted, and I was more than happy to, as I saw it, contribute sketches or contribute ideas. But then mysteriously, the team never materialized. And I have to admit, secretly, I was very pleased with that, actually. I thought, that's nice. This is just the two of us will be just fine, I think, you know, as long as we can fill the half hour every week. But I'm being a natural control freak. I very much like the idea that there wasn't going to be a large group of people squabbling with each other about this. So even though it was a bit of a shock to me, of course, Dermot being a natural control freak himself, that could have been a recipe for trouble, but we neither of us knew that at the time.
And Don, I remember watching an interview with an aunt of yours who was saying that, you know, even as a child, your dad always kind of had a performing streak to him, and that, you know, apparently your grandmother was a great kind of mimic. So was this kind of always the direction that the family thought he was going to go in life?
I don't know if they thought that. I mean, he was I'd say marked out as being unusual from a very early age. I mean, I know that Denise is the person who's known him the longest still alive. Would obviously have had a exposure to him as a child. Apparently, he when he was young, he was very actively minded. He was just a natural performer. He was quite gregarious. My understanding is by the time he got to school, anyway, like the brothers didn't take too kind to the fact that he was a bit that way inclined and wasn't just simply some sort of clone of whatever it was that they liked, and they bet him 6 away from Sunday. But Holly was, and I don't know if Gerry met Holly, but I know that his bike got stolen outside her removal, I think. I don't know if you remember that, Gerry, or am I wrong?
No, I don't remember that. These are the kind of details I never remember.
I could have dreamt it. I really could have dreamt this particular instance. But anyway, Holly was very much like my dad. He was a natural mimic. She took up all the neighbours and family and friends and whatever else, and sometimes could be quite unmerciful. I hasten to add, I'm not going to say in public, somebody who has sort of either relations living or, you know, people who might still be willing to be upset about it. But she could be, I mean, really kind of quite a scabrous humour. But she was great. And again, it was like the thing with my old man, like she was great at when you were a kid because she kind of included you in the devilment a little bit. And then I think because it was like a sudden pang of guilt that she'd done it and try and roll back, and actually she was perfectly respectful and not at all, an absolute messer. So that kind of way of kind of say taking and Gerry, you'll remember this. So some of the impressions were more about sort of the caricature of uh, the person, like an essence of the person, rather than a sound alike. So uh, and Holly could do that. I mean, she could really get it down with a sound, or with like even just like a phrase, and she did a couple of the neighbours as well. Now, who also are long gone, so no point in me trying to do a rendition of these impressions that are going around in my mind's eye. But he would have inherited a lot of that from her. Absolutely, yeah.
And then,
sorry, just to say, the family member that I had most connection with, because he tended to meet up with Dermot quite a lot, and I'd sometimes join them, was Dermot Morgan. And there was always something of a mystery around. Is he a first cousin, isn't he?
Yeah. So yeah, he's a first cousin.
Yeah, first cousin of Dermot's, but they were kind of an age and very good pals, and also very significantly, Donna was, I mean, very different from Dermot in many ways. He was a higher civil servant. He was quite important and even I never knew what was, the mystery surrounding this. Was Donna a mole in some form? Was he passing government secrets to Dermot that he could then use for his sketches? If it was happening, I can say it now, that it was so secret that even I didn't know if that was the case. But to be fair to Donna, though, I suspect he was a man of absolute integrity. Would that be right? Don?
He'd be far too discreet either way.
Yeah. He certainly never let anything slip in my presence, anyway. That's for sure.
No, but it's funny though, because he's private secretary at one stage. Actually, coincidentally, when you two gentlemen were doing scrap.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. He was that. He was that high in the the pecking order. Yeah, and it was kind of, yeah. Sorry.
Go on.
It was curious, like one of the big differences between Dermot and myself, but this is largely because I'm a sort of gutter Limerick man, whereas Dermot was actually, for all his revolutionary appearance, was a Southside boy. He was he taught in St. Michael's, didn't he?
He did. That's where a lot of revolutionaries go to school, apparently.
Well, that is true. That's true. I think Rory Quinn, another great revolutionary, went to St. Michael's. But anyway, Dermot taught there, but I've not completely lost the thread of what it was. Oh yes, that Dermot very much enjoyed it. Dermot quite liked to be around the people he was satirizing, which I was always scared of as a kind of, I always felt, I'd get infected, or I'd start to like them, and then I wouldn't be able to be as nasty as I wanted to be. I think but I don't know. I mean, you were too young to know at the time, but did you ever consider afterwards? Did it affect? I mean, it didn't appear to affect him particularly. But he did love to nip into the Unicorn every Saturday, where there'd be a kind of a group, a coven of civil servants, and people like PJ Maher would turn up there, and the odd politician, and they'd be, I had the impression that it was one of those occasions where they'd all be table hopping and saying clever things to each other. But I absolutely refused to go there, and so I never actually found out. But Dermot loved it.
Yeah, but would you believe, actually, Gerry, I was thinking about the Unicorn last night, because I was thinking that they used to do the Baglioni as a dessert, which was amazing. But yeah, there was an awful lot of table hopping, and there was an awful lot of showing off. I remember.
You were there. Did you get there as a?
Yeah, we used to go along to those a few of those lunches, and
being spoilt Southside brats that you were.
Well, Southside entitled brats that we were, exactly.
Entitled, exactly.
A proper order too. I want some of the decent food too. But what struck me was that I think that it was a little bit like, I mean, first of all, I think he just liked the chat, and he liked the kind of the tic-tacking anyway. But I also think as well that there was an element of you're sort of in plain sight, and I think it was a little bit like I always imagined Michael Collins on his bike, asking the soldier for a cigarette. I think he enjoyed that element of it too. But but I don't know if there's like anything more to it than that. But I suppose, I mean, I remember he used to take me up to the Berkeley court to kind of people watch when the rugby matches were on, because he wanted to look at what he used to call the gyms. You know, these guys, these kind of national Allicadoos and their sheepskin coats, and I think he liked the people watching of it as well.
Oh yeah, he loved that. He loved that, and also I will say, and one of the things he very much taught me, you know, when you talk about the broad strokes as opposed to the technical accuracy of an impression, he was technically very accurate, but he was also brilliant at getting the right political temperature, you know, or getting the political temperature right, shall we say. It's hard to recall now the things they were, but you know, a very simple one would be that Haughey hated people in his own party much more than he hated actual political opponents, for example. And this was a reality. And the kind of intricacies of those relationships, he understood very well. And they were, you know, they became very much part of the character, and in particular that master-slave construct that he created with Mara. And again, the Mara thing, you know, it's said time and time again, but it's absolutely true. Owen Roe, who did Mara, had never actually heard him, nor did Dermot, who wrote most of those sketches, think it was important that Owen did an accurate impression of PJ Mara. In fact, it would have been wrong if he did, because you wouldn't have got quite that kind of slavish quality. That so, because you know, like PJ Mara was a very uptown. What?
Very urbane man.
Yeah, very urbane, very uptown, very you know, and that external reality wouldn't have suited the dramatic setup. Instead, you had to have this kind of creeping Jesus, sneaking regarder, kind of chuckling slave. I'm thinking of as many insulting terms as I can think of, but anyway, the overall impression needed to be, you know, to actually set Haughey at the height at which he was at. You needed a certain underling. You couldn't have somebody being just as clever and as you say, urbane or witty as Haughey. Haughey had to be the top man. So it's the understanding of those you know, relationships, which if you get hung up on being technically accurate about what people sound like. I mean, the big advantage obviously was nobody the hell knew what Mara actually sounded like for a long time, so it didn't really matter.
I came across a quote from Pauline on talking about Scrap Saturday, saying basically there was nothing funnier than the radio basically ripping the arse out of the country. It was fantastic fun on a weekly basis, and it kind of just, I guess I kind of wonder just about standout memories and kind of key sketches otherwise from that time that either of you would think of.
Well, I mean, I suppose, Gerry, you can start, because you actually wrote the bloody thing. What do you think?
Well, half wrote it. I mean, the standout memories, like the actual recordings, were a job of work. Very often people were in ill temper. You know, very often we were, you know, doing sketches and absolutely nobody was laughing. I mean, in the nature of it, for example, there was always more there was always more fun to be had. It was both a problem and a delight that Dermot, you know, the legend is true that Dermot could not stop being funny, and I, being of a much meaner disposition, was always feeling, I wish he'd shut up and keep this for when we're actually recording something, and because it may not be as good when he's and you know, I won't say very often it wasn't, but it was certainly true that we laughed more off stage than we did, you know, than we did trying to do the recordings. The recordings were a job of work. Dermot, interestingly enough, really liked preparing for things and really liked the suggestion, but actually in the studio, he just did it and got out. And in fact, he you know, he didn't like to hang around afterwards particularly. It didn't. So the recordings on the day were very much a piece of work. All the enjoyment was in the week leading up to it, chatting about what it was we might or might not. Because actually, that was where Dermot got off his chest the really filthy stuff that he would love, that even though Scrap Saturday was known for pushing the envelope, there were certain things that certainly could not happen on the radio and probably still couldn't, and that was great crack, I have to say. But the and then we had to come down to earth and say, yeah, but like, what are we really going to actually put out in the air here?
Well, it's funny you should say that, Gerry, because I was thinking about it. The first sketch of the first episode, I thought set down a marker, just in retrospect, and it was the one where Jimmy McGee is talking dirty to his wife.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Played by Pauline, and it's like, and he's going through all the names of different players.
That's
right.
That's
important. No, Italians, Jimmy Italians, and he goes Donadoni, and she's making all the sounds. I was like, if you can imagine 10:30 on a Saturday morning on the national broadcaster, and in a country where Eamon Casey was still an upstanding member of the community, and the Magdalen laundries were still running, and then all of a sudden this is kind of happening. It is funny that it did kind of blow something open. But I was thinking, Sarah, about that, because there were a couple of sketches that I just thought were really kind of helped inform how people saw different aspects of Irish. I thought the Haughey sketches, where any of them are high ones, but I was actually thinking about the ones where he was someone who he had relatives from everywhere, and you remember, like, he would have said, like, the Japanese have this great idea of enthronement, and he'd had relations, like his uncles who bring him up to Mount Fuji with a 6-pack of sake and some geisha girls, and actually I was just thinking for when we were talking in advance of this, Gerry, and you probably penned these ones. Two of the ones that I recall that I really enjoyed were actually the ones that the Cyril Cusack sketch, where he just goes, yeah. He doesn't say very much, but it seems like, actually, when I was a young actor, you'd really have out the young guys by standing behind you juggling plates while you were trying to do some different.
God, well remembered. Yeah, I would just say it's good to know that probably anyone listening to this webinar, I'm expecting both of them to be over 60. There's probably not many young people listening to this, so they would know your reference to Cyril Cusack. They will recognize that actual reference. But with regard to the Haughey being from many places and having many antecedents and so on, that was absolutely all Dermot. I did not. I hate to admit it, in the sense that I would treasure if I had been involved, but Dermot wrote absolutely every single word of those, of every one of those. The idea was his in the first place, but there was a style to it which I could never have mimicked. And quite often we would, mimic each other's style in some way as we got to know each other along the way. But there was a particular quality to those which fed into the very best about Dermot. I don't want to get into kind of nerdy analysis, but the very best of Dermot was that he could be like funny in a really kind of simple, raw, double entendre kind of way. And then he also had this astonishing range of cultural references, which were always correct and always to the point. So all the bits about Japan and or Spain, or whatever other country he was sending Haughey to discover his ancestors, he would get the references right, and he would and it would work. They were absolutely brilliant, and it's not surprising actually that or rather it is surprising, I think, that they were so popular, because very often people don't appreciate the particular quality of sketches like that. They might prefer the more upfront, Haughey, insulting people all around. But these were brilliant pieces, and people listen to them now if they're repeated or they're on YouTube or something like that, and they're just funny in themselves. They are just funny as a piece of character, as a piece of comic drama.
I was thinking it's a little bit like, I don't know if you ever listened to Around the Horn, and Sandy and I forget the name of the other, Julian and Sandy.
Julian and Sandy, yeah.
Yeah, and again, like I remember it was something like Michael Palin saying his parents used to love listening, to it, even though they didn't understand what the guys were saying because they were using Polari. They just understood that it was intrinsically funny stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
I think if you didn't understand the references, you just go, "This is just completely mad cat
yeah,
kind of stuff,"
yeah.
and that's it.
And actually, I always thought that I mean, I'm just moving the goalpost slightly, but when you think about it, and again in reference to the to if there's any young person out there listening to or watching this, that it's understanding that in the 80s, when Dermot started out, he had to find his way without any of the sources that are available to young comedians now, by which I mean, you know, you can make your own YouTube videos, you can, you know, have a range of broadcasting possibilities to get on air and be heard. Dermot had nothing. So I'm always curious, do you remember as a child, what, you know, do you remember a time when he was struggling to get himself known, and because I didn't know him at that stage?
Well, we had it tough.
Right. Yes,
Middle of the shoebox, middle of Wilson Road. I yes, short answer, absolutely yes. We were smashed for money. We never had any, and
up there. Yeah, I know in Mount Merion, it must have been a trial for you.
Look, we only had one butler. And for I was only once a month kind of a thing. But what can you do? So we set fire to some of the peasants, and you know, lived off the heating. But no, but it was a funny kind of, and actually you've hit the nail on the head on something there, Gerry, which was that he was from South Dublin, lived in a very nice part of South Dublin, was on the telly, and people assumed that he had loads of money, and we're like, yeah, but you're all that, and you have this, and that kind of washed off on us too, I suppose. And you're kind of marked out as being the Irish thing, or you think you're all that, don't you? And the thing was that, like, certainly in the early 80s, it was a very, very precarious existence. I mean, as being self-employed always is. But like you said, there were no comedy clubs per se. There was the Jury's Cabaret. But like that was Hal Roach. You know, no other comedians need apply. I mean, the closest thing domestically to kind of even vaguely edgy stand-up would have been Neil Tabine, I would have thought.
That's right.
These wonderful, really kind of whimsical shows that were kind of akin to Dave Allen. But Dave was obviously over in the UK being, you know, really blazing a trail. But when you think about what people have now at their disposal, and it's still financially a precarious existence, but if you look at the likes of Killian Sutherland or Michael Fry, or these people who can use social media, often to very devastating effect, to kind of produce sketches and whatever, it's often very high quality. Geez, if you'd had that back in the day, like you would.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
But
I mean,
sorry,
just his interruptions on the Mike Murphy breakfast show, which in my memory was the first time people heard of Dermot Morgan. But if people have any notion that he was earning, you know, hand over fist he was earning nothing, I imagine, or maybe they threw him the odd 20 quid voucher or something, you know, those kind of, and yet his name, but I mean, you know, he just had to get himself seen and heard.
One thing I came across when I was doing a bit of research before this evening, I found a quote from Bertie Ahern talking about Scrap Saturday, and he basically said he didn't think that the work that Dermot and Gerry were doing could really be replicated, and that his exact words was, he'd always pull himself out of bed in lots of time to listen to Scrap Saturday, of which, of course, he was featured. And it kind of feeds into what you guys are talking about here, and it kind of got me realizing, like, John, how did you realize kind of the significance of the work that your dad was creating when you were a child, or how has your relationship to his work grown as you've got older?
Well, when we were very small, we would have been aware about the fact that our dad did something that was unusual, because the bin man would go, Father Shiny lives in there, doesn't he? And we're going, who's Father Shiny? Oh, Daddy. Okay, right, fair enough. But we knew about the fact that he did unusual stuff. I mean, I was reminiscing about this a couple of years back when his 20th anniversary came up, and I remember when I was in Irish class in school. Well, I went to the German school in Clonskeagh, so we only did Irish from fifth class. But I remember, the thing about, what do your parents do for a living? And I would think it's kind of a way for teachers to scope out who's worth looking up to. But anyway, so like, it's not like, oh, this guy's dad is an accountant, this guy's, and it could come to me and I wouldn't know what to say. And I remember what the teachers at the time said, well, maybe Far Grin would be a good kind of description of funny man. And I always kind of took it as had a kind of a whiff of being pejorative, because being funny or being smart in Ireland can have a negative connotation. But like, if the Benmen on the street are kind of marking your dad out for being different, you got to know that he is a bit different. And he sort of like, his work was one of the features that made him kind of stand at an angle to the rest of the universe. But when he was doing Scrap, we were old enough to appreciate the fact that this was something that was very, very, very big, right? That we would have probably been kind of insulated from to some extent. Actually, I remember, I don't know if Gerry remembers, Bobby, Rob, and myself ended up in a sketch about 1916 on one of the early episodes.
Oh yeah.
Like, what do we do? And lads, do you want to get in there? It was all very last minute, but you're looking at this world, and you're looking at someone who.
It was 1916 as a sitcom, wasn't it?
I think it was even as a board game.
Is that right?
Although I know the sketch you're talking about. Whereas Dev, he'll be down in Bones Mills again. But we were sort of aware with Scrap the fact that it was taking on a whole new kind of life, and like, I don't know what it says. You've got 12-year-old, 13-year-old kids coming up to you talking about Mara and all this kind of stuff. I do remember, like, one classmate of mine remonstrated with me over some sketch about the Iraq War, the first Iraq War, and saying, how can you make jokes about this? And I was going, oh, why are you taking it up with me? Take it up the line to someone who gives a monkey.
Absolutely.
But in any event, that was the you would have been aware of it. You also would have been aware of it, about the fact that he was probably doing something slightly dangerous, and there was a kind of a whiff of danger about what he was doing. And in particular, when you look at stuff that you would recall people kind of saying, "Oh, he's blasted this or this, that, the other," and that kind of cretinous kind of commentary that would have existed in Ireland back in the 80s, when we thought that religion was a good thing. So basically, short answer, yes, we were aware of the fact that he was doing something quite powerful. And I think when it hit Scrap, and I can remember we were in Mondello Park for something with the neighbour used to go rally driving, so they would go along with him. And I remember they had on the loudspeakers, they stopped doing the PA announcements and they just played Scrap. And that was quite cool, because everyone just kind of stopped and listened to it. And it was like Shawshank Redemption without nice music. And then off everyone went half an hour later.
Did you sorry to cut across you, Sarah, but did you enjoy going to school on Monday morning after Scrap? Was it in your head, or was it nothing?
No, well, with Ted, I would have been more self-conscious about it.
Of course, yeah.
But then again, I was a teenager. I would have been self-conscious about breathing. But why is my nose whistling? But with Scrap, you just would have been conscious about the fact that there was something that was just very unusual, and the grown-ups seemed to get something. The kids thought it was funny because of the silly voices, and it was just a bit kind of manic. The grown-ups knew there was something else going on. I don't recall anybody making any comments about it. So,
all right, okay.
Tell us about Ted. How did he talk about and feel about kind of the success of what it was, or what do you remember?
I probably Dylan Thomas at the beginning. I remember him being very diffident about it because he wasn't sure where it was going to go, and he got offered the part around the time Scrap ended, and then there was this. You remember this, Gerry, the TV show Newshounds that didn't go anywhere.
Yes.
For complicated reasons, and I think he just saw like he just hit another brick wall, and was like, well, what am I supposed to do now? And I think he came along and gone, it is a big risk to take, because he was a big fish in a small pond over here to a certain extent. Not to be disrespectful to the Irish kind of entertainment scene, but it's a big leap over to the UK, and you're going, you could end up in the same league as the people you watched as a kid yourself, who are still in their prime, and like that's a very powerful kind of thought. But I think he was kind of going, well, geez, what if it goes wrong? You know, and I'm back down doing Silver Springs Hotel or something like that for a bank holiday Sunday. I think he was worried about the what it was and would it be a success and all that, and was he up to it? Um, but but I think when it started kicking off, I think he was delighted. But I think that certainly I don't know, Gerry, if you would agree with this, and maybe it's my own personal experience that kind of is sort of prejudicing how I view it. But I always thought that his delight in his successes with Ted, I think were complicated by the fact that it came on the back of, you know, always having the door slammed in his face over here. I think it was almost as much like relief just to get out and get a shot at something that could be a success and show you could deliver.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. He had conversations. I remember the process when he first, you know, because we would still be meeting even though Scrap was over at that point, although we didn't know whether we would ever go back to it again. But we were doing our things, and we had these conversations. And I remember a very particular feeling he had about it, which is that Dermot never saw himself as an actor. Dermot saw himself as a creator. To use the modern parlance, actually, he was a maker. I think we like to say that now, but as in, because you know he created his own production company, Q Productions. He wrote most of his own work. You know, whether it be stand up or Scrap Saturday or any other sketch thing that he did. So he always loved that writing part of him, and so these were he had these fish to fry. And then he was offered what was effectively an acting job with someone else's script. And so it was both a brilliant opportunity, as you say, to bypass all that kind of, you know, mess that was trying to constantly be something worth being in the Irish context, and getting beyond that, and then been only there, if you like, as an actor. And so he was. So two things happened, it seemed to me, from my you know, conversations as I went out, as the series went through and it became the success it did. And then, very importantly, when he won the Comedy Award, which I think was at the end of the second season of Ted. I might be wrong, but anyway, he won the Comedy Award. But he discovered in himself something that he possibly didn't realize, is that he was a very good actor. I mean, he was in a situation where actually Ted didn't get all the funny lines. Ted, you know, very often had to play off, and you had the two clown characters, if you know what I mean, who were guaranteed laughs in Dougal and Father Jack. He could have ended up as being the dull, straight person in the middle, but actually not at all. And the reason for that, and you only see it, you know, I wasn't entirely aware of it the first time I saw Ted, but every time I dip in to watch now, I am reminded of, and of course, Pauline actually is the third clown character. So he was surrounded by these grotesques of various kind, and that he not only survived that, but he actually carved a character that was the go-to character for the audience. You know what I mean? That it really was Father Ted was at the center of the piece, and he found that. And I actually think that Dermot wouldn't have believed that he could be that thing before he did Father Ted, because I know from Scrap Saturday, he you know, he was always at the center of what was funny. He was Haughey, he was Mike Murphy, he was, you know, he was all the characters that were going to be the funny characters in it. And there was a danger, but you know, he went for it, and then discovered that he was. And you look at episodes of Father Ted, the certain episodes, and you see the way he reacts to what is happening around him. You see the way he plays the character, and you see him both touching and funny. You see him being horrible and funny. You know, you see a kind of complexity in the character that the writers gave him, because they understood episode by episode that he was able to do it. And it would have been fascinating to see, you know, where he could have gone from there, because by the time Father Ted finished, he would have been one of the, I mean, he won the Comedy Awards, one of the leading comic actors in the British Isles, shall we call it.
But yeah, it's funny about that, because I remember I had a brief sort of correspondence recently with Liz Evans, who was one of the producers of Father Ted.
Oh, I know the name, just know the name from the credits, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And she said that he won the BAFTA posthumously, and he said if for one scene only he was to win it, it was for the scene where he had the row with Pat Mustard, and he was flummoxed when he said that Pat Mustard wasn't taking necessary precautions in the bedroom, and that kind of well, back off. But that scene, and she said for that scene alone he should have gotten the BAFTA, but yeah, and it's a funny thing, but I think it's a thing about the nature of him. I think he understood that he had a brilliance, but I don't think he really understood the dimensions of it. And I think was only sort of getting into his stride by the time he died, which was realizing he could do this, he could do that, and he could, very credibly go up to the BBC and say, well, I'm thinking about doing this thing about whatever, and they would listen to him, go, this actually sounds like, it could be something. But it is again, something that I find about him that I do regret, is the fact that we don't get to see where he went with that. We just know he did Ted. He was really, really good. He was fantastic. He got a BAFTA, which was like the greatest FU to everybody in official Ireland who ever, And I always think about that bit in Ted where he has a list of people who affect him over the years. He goes, and now we move to the liars. But I often whenever I clap eyes on the BAFTA, I often think about that, and if he'd actually collected it himself, it would have been quite a satisfactory moment.
Yeah, I mean, it is, obviously it's in a way this is a terrible thing to say, but he, because of a tragic death, but also because of the nature of his choices, that he is left with two monuments, if you like, to his work that managed to end without dying a long, slow death, and that happened to he himself as well. But also, he never.
That's quite an apt turn of phrase, I would have thought, Gerry.
Yeah. I know. So, but you know what I mean. It was like there. Like Father, it still amazes me. I as somebody who sadly had nothing to do with it, but that it's on like almost like permanent record on some television channel or other. I don't know. Has there been a week in the last 20 years where an episode of Father Ted wasn't available to be seen? And there are only how many? 80, 20?
Yeah, something like that. It's like Fawlty Towers. Fawlty Towers is on 2 seasons.
Yes, but even more than Fawlty Towers, it's repeated and repeated and repeated, and it's got to very recently. And it wasn't in the context of this coming on. I wouldn't normally have bothered, but I was flicking around, and Father Ted had just started, and as it happened, I said, "Oh, I don't remember that scene. Did I? I don't think." And the thought occurred to me: Did I? Was there an episode that I actually hadn't seen? And it was from the third series, and I ended up watching it right through, and I began to remember enough bits of it to realize that I probably had seen it, but it had been so long that I was amazed at bits in it that I had completely forgotten, and therefore was able to laugh at again and enjoy again. But it is an extraordinary thing to have been involved in.
It's funny. I was during the most recent incarnation of the lockdown. We watched it with the kids, and like Dermot is 6 in July, and we watched the rabbits episode, the Plague of Rabbits episode, and I did a personal bias, which is that I was there the week that they were rehearsing it. I remember the rabbits causing a massive distraction in rehearsals, but anyway, so we said we watched it, and he sees the opening credits, sees his own name on the screen. He goes, absolutely bananas. He thinks it's brilliant. But after a while, I realized that the lads are really getting sucked into it, because Peter, the middle boy, is 4.5 as well, and they were creasing themselves laughing at all the kind of silly things. But when you go back to it, and I always find it's one of those series that you can watch again and again, and you get something new out of it each time. And like you were saying about with Dermot Senior, he could possess pathos and be grotesque at the same time. He could be all those sorts of things, and you do begin to see different shades. Which and again, you can have a fantastic script and it can die in its arse because the actors aren't any good and vice versa. But they were very lucky because they had a very good starting point with excellent scripts. But they really got three core actors who knew their onions, knew what they were about. And when you look at, say, like Ireland, four. When you look at what Ireland went on and did, or what Paulie went on and did, and they did loads of different kind of interesting and unusual things. And Ireland wasn't an actor by trade either.
That's right.
And again, maybe my dad could have done Murder in Paradise, and we could have spent a few months out in the West Indies. And wouldn't that have been a nice way to spend your time watching filming?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind, because obviously an interest for me is actors. Because I direct actors all the time, and working with Dermot on Scrap Saturday, it never occurred to me to think of him as an actor. It was a wholly different relationship. But watching him in Father Ted, you could see him doing anything, and you would also hope that Dermot's respect for that talent he had in himself grew, actually, that he didn't just see it as one small part of all. And of course, I completely understand how, because I know it for myself, I understand the importance of the writing to him and the importance of creating that. But, not just your Murders in Paradise, and we don't want to get too extravagant, but there is that kind of history of, if you look at something like Cracker, for example, actually at a original, again, he started out as a comedian. There is that kind of history, and the British are very good at it. Again, in Ireland, we're not so good at it, of understanding that a comic talent can be used in ways that are not comic at all and are very kind of rich and complex and all the rest of it. And he more than showed enough in Father Ted to have gotten people interested in what the possibilities might be in the future in that line as well. So it was all there for him. But equally, there was the possibility of failure. You know what I mean? And he never experienced failure, which is not something any of the rest of us can say.
No, I mean, well, it definitely is. The gamble of going over to the UK paid off, and I think that was an incredible thing. I suppose I have a slightly different kind of view in it, was the fact that until he could actually get his career to progress to another level in Ireland, there was always a kind of undercurrent of he was kind of under. I always felt he was underestimated in Ireland, particularly in the 80s, where he was sort of pigeonholed as whether he's a bit wayward, he's a bit of a maverick, and he's a bit dangerous, and we're not sure about that either, frankly. But I think that ultimate success is just like, that's it.
Yeah, no, the timing never quite. Timing is everything when it comes to these things, and we were very lucky with Scrap Saturday that myself and Dermot did this thing at a time when, for some reason or other, everybody was ready for it, and the audience was ready for it, and a bit like the government at the moment, who are being in the COVID thing, that they're being kind of dragged along and waiting to see what the people think before they decide what they think. Well, in a way, that was the situation in RTE at that time. They really didn't see anything of any significance about Scrap Saturday until the audience saw it, and then suddenly they were all up for it. But then equally, they weren't interested in it if they couldn't mold it to the way they wanted it to be, and to turn it into whatever would have fitted that slot, and just kept going. And so it was never going to work out for either of us, actually. But it was never going to certainly never work out for Dermot that he needed to have something more like we have now, where there are choices, where you can bring your talent, and that the talent will find a home elsewhere. RT at that time saw itself as the only place in town, the only place to go to, and as a result, didn't take much care of how they behave towards their talent. There's no, there just is no doubt about that. It's the kind of thing that happens always in any sort of monopoly situation, and so Dermot did absolutely the right thing to step beyond it.
Which is also was one of his kind of pet peeves, and it was less to do with RTE, I think, and more to do with the idea that you have these monoliths that sort of the gatekeepers of what is acceptable and what isn't. But it struck me actually on a slightly different note, Gerry. What struck me, and this is probably going to be of no interest to anyone watching this, but I was thinking about the fact that even when Teddy Sharon started, Jack Cruz never got his own TV show, so far as I recall, or Jimmy O'D characters.
No. They were brought in to do a special, or they might be a guest on something, or there was some bit of an effort made with Jimmy O'D with I can't remember. I'm far too young. But anyway, on we move.
But too late. You gave too much away there, Gerry.
They did it with Neil Tobin, as you the aforementioned, but he got run off the airwaves pretty quickly as well when he crossed the line as far as they were concerned. So they always assumed that they would that they could just dispense with people and find somebody else.
It's we're very, it's been an incredibly quick hour, but we're nearly coming up to the hour, and I guess just kind of
you no questions to ask at all?
I do. I have 101, but I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you. It's
for the last hour for
I just went off and had a cup of tea.
Yeah, Don myself had to fill. We had to waffle away, filling time, waiting for you to ask us a question or two.
I sincerely appreciate you covering for me. It's one of those things that kind of listening to you both talk, you kind of get this amazing, a really clear sense of kind of a really collaborative man who really kind of wanted to produce good work, and that was always really the kind of the focus in so many different ways. And like Don, I couldn't help but think that you have quite a unique experience in having a monument dedicated to your dad in the heart of the capital city of the country that you grew up in. And I kind of just, in kind of asking you both kind of to round out the hour, just to think about, I'd be curious to know a little bit about, how do you see your dad's or Dermot's legacy playing out? How would he want to be remembered? How would you want him to be remembered? Or kind of what's the story that I've not yet asked you about that you'd love to share?
I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. I mean, I'd love him to be remembered as someone who was very much in the fabric of Dublin, and I think he is. I find, I'm not trying to be blowing smoke up his rear end, and there's no point anyway because he's dead. But I find that he, if from my point of view, what I love about him, in retrospect, apart from the fact that he did all these amazing things, when I go to Dublin, I can still get a whiff of him. And I love the fact that the monument in Merrion Square was obviously was a big deal, was a big honor, and I did think that the design, if it had been a giant two fingers pointing towards Leinster House, would have probably been a lot more kind of viscerally enjoyable, but you wouldn't have been able to kind of put your Dermot down in the gestures thrown it and consider it. But I would love people to remember him as much for Ted and for Scrap, but also for the fact that he was part of the kind of the soundscape of Ireland at that time when it was a very miserable place. He brought a little bit of danger and certainly a new conversation, that we're still having and we're not finished with. And also the fact that he's probably one of the most famous, not the most famous, but one of the most famous advocates for the League of Ireland. But there you go. But I hope people, when they're in Dublin or they go to visit Dublin, they get a sense of him, whether that's going to the UCD Rovers on a Friday night in the pissing rain or a pint outside Dohenny's. But that's the fact that he blazed a trail, I think, and he blazed a trail for the way that we talk about ourselves, the way that we see ourselves. I'd love to remember that.
Gerry, any thoughts?
That's lovely.
Great talk, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really appropriate actually that you did this. That's why that the Little Museum did this, because he was that thing which I know your honoured director loves. He was a flaneur. I mean, he was always about the town, and he had his favourite spots. He'd pop into Doheny and Nesbitt. He'd go into the Unicorn. We used to meet in the brand new, as it was then, Elephant and Castle. And enjoy the chicken wings down there. He'd be at Lansdowne Road for matches. You'd bump into Dermot. And actually, for anybody he met, I mean, obviously he just didn't stop strangers in the street and amuse them. But for anybody who knew Dermot, it was always, you met him and you laughed, because he was always so naturally funny. It was literally pouring out of him. The job of work that people had to do, and that people often struggled with, was trying to bottle it, was trying to get it and put it in a place where it emerged out into the airwaves and on that. But I could see him now doing funny vlogs, doing podcasts, doing all these kind of things, and letting all that stuff out. There wasn't the space for it almost on the airwaves back then. So it's actually a very fortunate thing that with Father Ted and Scrap Saturday, it managed to be bottled, and it's there and could be seen. But what it gives no sense of was the madness of just spending time with him. I mean, a madness that used to drive me mad sometimes, because I thought, we have a feckin' program to do. We have half an hour to write one way or the other. Can we please stop it? I would take that again and again before a kind of working well mediocrity that produced some mildly humorous result at the end. It was fantastic, and it was a fantastic time, actually. You know what I mean? Can I just say that I noticed recently somebody on the radio or television recently was talking about the 80s and how dark and desperate it was, and I kind of think this is the sort of narrative that's been going on about Ireland. Before long they were actually talking about the early 90s was being dark and desperate. The early 90s were fantastic fun. Now, they weren't fantastic fun for everybody, but they were certainly, as I remember it, a great time to be around, and a great time to be, trying to be funny about this country. It was very easy, actually, in many ways, but it was a time when you could do it. And Dermot, having been, how shall I say it, having been ahead of his time, kind of caught up with his time for that period. He owned that time between 90 and 95 or 97. And then he was gone from us. But the magic was there at that time, and you literally can't think of the 90s in Ireland without thinking about Dermot.
I couldn't agree more. It's and I kind of, as you said kind of a minute ago, that it was kind of, you were glad this conversation was happening in the Little Museum. Like, this evening came about when I think I reached out to Don a couple of months ago and started pestering him about finding a way to see Dermot recorded in the museum's collection, to see his story come into the museum. And you can be warned, I'm going to go back to that conversation, but I'm so entirely thrilled that you've both given us the time this evening. I've just so thoroughly enjoyed sitting here listening to you sharing stories and just reminiscing and sharing memories. So, you've both been so generous and kind with both your time and your memories. So just sincerely, thank you both so much.
No problem.
With that is bringing this evening to a close. So as ever, to everyone who's been here, thank you so much for taking the time. To Gerry Stembridge and Don Morgan, it's been an absolute privilege and a delight, and I really sincerely appreciate your time. So thank you both so much.
Good to see you, Don. Thanks, Sarah.
Great to see you. See you, Sarah.
Hey, good evening.